workshop. My name is Dr. Booker, and I'm a learning specialist in the Office of Learning and Teaching. And we actually have some of your peers here, and they're going to introduce themselves. They're also here in support of your step preparation. So I'll let them get started with their introductions.
Hey guys, my name is Yusuf Kadir. I'm a third year, originally from Novi, Michigan. I'm currently on my pediatrics rotation, and as you can imagine, I have really bad baby fever, so that's a little bit about me right now.
Hi, my name's Igor Cinemarkovich. I'm also one of the third years. I used to be an SIL, so some of you guys may know me from that. I'm currently doing my elective rotation at cardiology at the VA.
Hi everyone, my name is Jody Chow, and I'm also a third year, originally from Okemos, Michigan, and I'm currently on an elective in radiology. Oh, hello. Cool.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie George. I'm a third year, currently doing internal medicine at the DPC. I'm a part-time vegan. I like to crack a lot of jokes. I'm a fun person. If you see me around, say hi.
Thank you to everyone who came to participate. We're so happy that we could get some of your peers here to get some of their perspective on step preparation. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So here are some of the things that we are going to talk about today. I'm going to go over a few of the announcements that are important for step prep in relation to where you guys are right now. We're going to review some of the requirements of the Step 1 study plan. That's going to be due during your dedicated study period. Within the first couple of weeks, you'll have to submit a dedicated study plan. And so I want to kind of start to talk about what that'll look like in the future and what the requirements are. We're also going to review resources. We're going to talk about resources, and your peers are going to jump in and really start to tell you about how to use resources now, thoughts about how to use them in the future. And so we're going to go through all of those types of strategies. And then we're going to wrap up this session by talking about the importance of study goals. And in particular, we'd like for you guys to start thinking about study goals for now and moving forward, and possibly implementing those into your lives right now and using them before our next session. Okay, so here we are. So announcements. So the first thing I want to talk about is support. So there are support mechanisms built into your pre-dedicated portion. And so obviously one of them are our Canvas page, which actually went live. And so I saw that everyone has pretty much been engaged with that in some kind of way so far, and that's great. There's a lot of resources built into that page, as you can notice. In the modules, you'll see that we've included everything in there, from examples of study schedules to examples of research and literature that is out there that supports some of the decisions that we make about how to prepare students for STEP. So there's a lot of information in there. We want you to get used to that page now, so that when your dedicated studies comes, you'll know where everything is. Also, in addition to that, we have workshops. So this is the first workshop that we are offering to students pre-dedicated. This workshop is basically an overview. So the whole point in this workshop is to kind of go over some general ideas and tips, and then we're going to kind of move forward with the study plan. We're going to really focus on your study plan for our next workshop. We're going to talk about the study plan in October a lot, actually. We're also going to talk about how to use UWorld in your study plan. And then lastly, we're going to wrap up with some general tips that I think is kind of going to be our last hoorah before you start your dedicated study period. I want to lastly say that support is also offered by OLT and SPLs. The Office of Learning and Teaching, myself, Dr. Brennan, and Ms. Tanya Reza, we all work with students in group sessions such as these, virtual sessions. We're also going to start to implement some, some group sessions where your peer support people can be involved, such as the peers that you see here today, in addition to the Canvas page, right? So we have a lot of research there, but we also have SPLs who are really dedicated to this process. we're really happy that they could be a part of these discussions this year more so, and also helping us in planning and implementing curriculum. So I think more than ever, our SPLs and our peers are involved in this process. So they also offer support. RLOs will be posted there, and additional resources from your peers. So those are the types of supports that you have right now. And we'll talk more about what support looks like during your dedicated period soon enough. I do want to touch on registration for a minute. There were a lot of questions about registration back during the time that we had our town hall. And so there was some information that was miscommunicated. And so I do want to talk about that a little bit. So the first thing and the best thing that I can say is that Step 1 registration is open. As many of you know, you have already done it. Some of you haven't, though, and I'm getting some communication from you guys, but I want you to know that the registration period is open. Also want to let you know that your eligibility window is January through March of 2020. I want to kind of slow down, though, and say that if you have additional questions about registration, OLT actually doesn't own this process. And when I say own, I mean there's another department that kind of regulates and makes the decisions for registration, and that's records and registration here in the School of Medicine. So I have provided their link. And I also have provided some more specific contact information for them. They have actually an entire web page devoted to instructions about how to register. So I have been sending people and students to that. So if you have any questions, I want you to start there. And if you have additional questions, I'd like you to reach out to Records and Registration. You can always contact me, but I'm just letting students know that they kind of own this process. And so that's the best place to get the correct information. Okay. So I'm going to go into the study plan rubric, sorry. And there is a question actually, so I'm going to pause a bit. What can I do right now to prepare for Step 1? I know of UWorld or anything else I should be using. People say the more questions you do, the better. That is a good question. And actually, I'm going to let your peer leaders actually respond to that question. But I'm just going to get through this last slide, and then I'm going to let them kind of take that question. So peer leaders, get ready to answer that question. All right. So we're going to jump back to the study plan rubric for a second. In January, all students will be required to submit a Step 1 study plan. And in the past, we've had rubrics that kind of explain what we'll be looking for in those study plans. And I just want to kind of give you an idea of what we'll be looking for this year. So the first thing that we'll be looking for in your study plan is UWorld questions. UWorld questions, if you weren't aware, are the most high yield resource that you can use during dedicated study. So we want to see that you're using UWorld questions, both subject specific and mixed block questions. And we'll be looking for that embedded in your plan in some form or fashion. We'll also be looking at what resources you're using. So obviously, UWorld and First Aid is a go-to resource, but we want to know, in addition to that, do you plan to use additional resources? And we'll look for a list, actually. So a list of all of the resources that you plan to use during your dedicated. We'll also be looking, really important thing is we'll be looking for health and wellness. How are you embedding health, wellness, and self-care into your schedule? Health and wellness, self-care, those things are very different across the board for different students. So, you know, self-care for me could be spending time with my family. And self-care for you could be that you exercise 5 days out of the week. So it really depends on the person. And so I want to make sure that I say that because it doesn't have to be anything that Dr. Booker says to do. It's really, really individualistic. So the next thing is the desired Step 1 score. So we've always asked that students tell us what their goal score is. So we want to see that you're planning in regards to what your goals are. In addition to that, we'd like to see a Step 1 date. In the past, we haven't asked for a step date, but I think it's important that we ask for a step date moving forward so that students can actually have a plan for how they're going to assess themselves before they take their 7 to 10 day CBSSA. This also gives you time to make checks and balances and to see where you are with your schedule in order to make improvements before your testing. So always starting with the end in mind is kind of the approach that we're taking with that. And so I want to say that obviously the test date could change, but at least plan to have a step date a certain date. And we're asking that students actually plan to take the test within the first 6 weeks of the dedicated study period. If that needs to change, it can change, but we want you to plan for the first 6 weeks. Lastly, required and non-required activities. So students obviously have some required activities in January. So we want you to definitely include those in your plan for studying. But in addition to that, we want you to include those non-required activities, going to the grocery store, any weddings or travel that you have. You're going to obviously need to include those into your schedule, right? So that's a peek at what's required. This is also located on the Canvas page, so feel free to take a look at this. It's posted in the Canvas page. It's under the examples of study schedules module. Okay. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about some of the research literature that relates to step 1. Some of our decisions, and most of our decisions, not some of them, most of our decisions are made based on what the literature says and based on our student data. So one thing that I found and I wanted to share with you guys, and I shared it in the May presentation that I gave to students, but most students begin studying for step 1 during their preclinical curriculum, and they increase their intensity throughout the year, right? And as it leads up to their protected study time. So that is across the board from institution to institution how students do things. Step 1 scores are significantly correlated with UWorld QBank. And so that's one of the reasons why your institution purchases that for you. We want you to be supported. We want you to have that QBank. We know that it's the best. And also students who use USMLE UWorld QBank had higher step 1 scores. So again, it's highly successful, and that's compared to students who did not use that resource, right? What we know is that interactive study options offer the best improvements for step 1 scores. So making your study sessions active is really important, and one of the best ways we know that students can do that is by utilizing the UWorld QBank. So this is kind of leading us into our conversations. Your peers here that are peer leaders are going to go into this a little more in depth, but I just want to talk a little bit about first aid in UWorld. So we know that first aid is a physical resource guide, and I always call it a resource guide because that's what it is. It's not a textbook. And so especially during dedicated, I want you to treat it as a resource guide. I oftentimes get students who come in and they say, during dedicated, I'm going to start out by reading first aid cover to cover. And so I don't think that's the best option for a lot of students. Okay, so I always want to remind you that it's a resource guide. It's not a textbook. It's safe to read that now, right? If you want to read it from cover to cover right now, that's fine. But come dedicated, we should be able to, use this as a resource guide. The other thing is UWorld. So you have 2,700 questions in that QBank. You also have 2 self-assessments that are included in that. And so I always like to point out that it is not an assessment tool, right? So some students approach this QBank and say, I cannot use it, excuse me, I can't use it until, excuse me, I can't use it until I have mastered all the material. And so I want to say that's the wrong approach. Your QBank should be used as a learning tool. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Your QBank should be used as a learning tool, and it should be used throughout the pre-dedicated and dedicated period. So don't wait till dedicated to crack that open. I hope that most of you are already using it. If you're not, get started. Your peers are going to talk about how you can do that and ways to incorporate those resources. Excuse me. Sorry. Best practices. So I just talked a little bit about this already, but making sure that you're using these resources in sync with your coursework is the most appropriate way to do that during pre-dedicated. Again, your peers are going to talk about how to do those things. And making sure that you understand what the purpose of these resources are. First aid is a great tool. It's a tool that is used as a resource guide, and UWorld is a great learning tool. Okay. So I've talked a lot and I'm choking, so I'm going to give someone else the floor at this time. Igor, your peer support supplemental instruction leader, is going to start by talking about the Step 1 prep study plan must-haves. And if we want to take a pause, though, we can actually start to address some of the questions. I know one of the questions that I read out, and I'm sorry, it was about how to incorporate these resources into your study schedule now. If you want to start out by talking about that, someone wants to grab that and then go into your presentation, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I can answer the first question. So I'll read it again for everybody. So the question was, what can I do right now to prepare for step 1? I know of UWorld. Is there anything else I should be using? People say the more questions you do, the better. So right now, it is a good idea to use UWorld, and you should be like focusing on the UWorld questions that are specific to like the course material that you guys are currently going over. That's a great way to prepare for the NBMEs and also kind of like learn the information as well. Some other things we can be doing as you're going through your course material now, you can be using the first aid book, and you should be annotating like the high yield portions of like the course material into first aid. That way you'll have like a nice concise document when it comes time to studying for step, and you'll have like everything in one place. But if there's anything else that any other students want to add, please let me know before I start my presentation.
I would just add, Katie talking, sorry. I would just add that you do want to, don't overload yourself on questions to the point where you're not learning the material. Make sure you guys get your foundational knowledge down at this point in the game, because you don't want to try and be learning stuff when you're in dedicated. So use the question banks, Igor's going to talk about like a ton of resources I've never even heard of because he's like an expert at it. But point being, use whatever resource you're going to use to really focus on getting your foundational knowledge down at this point. And then that way your dedicated period is mostly reviewing or continuing to reinforce areas where you're weaker. But put that foundational knowledge down now. I think that should be your conceptual focus.
All right. So I guess I'll get started on my portion of the presentation. I'm going to give you guys just some general helpful tips for your step study schedule. So hopefully by now, throughout your first year and a half of med school, you guys probably know what works best for you and how you best learn. So when it comes down to the dedicated step study, like that's not the time to begin a new study method. Hopefully, if you guys want to start like a new study method, you guys should try it out right now during your coursework, and that way you'll be able to figure out if it works well for you or not, and then you can apply it to your step study schedule later on. If you have like a good study method that already works well for you, there's really like no need to change it drastically when it comes time to studying for step. You guys can continue doing what you've already been doing if it's been successful for you throughout years 1 and years 2, and it's been getting you the NVMe scores that you've been wanting to get. And I know people always talk about resources, and it's a very important thing to choose your resources wisely, because there's a bunch of resources out there, and there's absolutely no way you can get through all of them. You shouldn't really be overwhelming yourself with resources. It's better to go through a few resources like very, very thoroughly than just to skim a bunch of them. And as I mentioned before, you can start using these resources now by like annotating coursework material into those resources, like your first aid book or your pathoma book or any other books that you're using. So you can begin using them right now. It's really never too early. And once you have like all these things annotated, it becomes very, very helpful during dedicated, because it's going to save you a lot of time, and it's really going to be your lifeline and your main method of studying. I know like everybody always talks about like the resources they're using, and like you may think, okay, I'm not using these resources. Like, yeah, I feel stressed out. It's okay if you're not using the resources that everybody else is using. You just kind of have to worry about yourself and just figure out what works well for you, and just kind of like stick to that. Um, People tend to like overlook the Wayne material, especially during your coursework. People Things that I've heard from other students that are currently like M2s, like they kind of like focus on like outside resources and they kind of like put the Wayne material on the back burner. You really shouldn't be doing that. I know people say like it goes into way more depth than you really need for like the NBME exams, but like there are some very detailed questions on like STEP and the NBMEs where like that Wayne material really does come in handy. So you guys really should be kind of like balancing some Wayne material and also some like outside resources as well. You don't want to just go completely with one resource or the other. You kind of need like a good balance. And you should also kind of like tier your resources based on like how helpful they are. So like some resources are like very helpful, like UWorld for example. It's like one of the most recommended resources because it mimics the step style questions and it also provides like a very thorough explanation. And so like you can get a lot of learning out of those questions. So like that might be like one of the resources you want to spend like more time with during your dedicated period. I know for me, when I was studying for STEP, I would basically spend the entire morning going through like UWorld questions and spending a lot of time like reading the explanations because those are like very good explanations. Whereas like other resources like Pathoma, that's kind of like just like a quick review and it's like not as detailed as some other resources. So you can kind of like spend less time with that. So you want to like kind of tier your resources and make sure you're spending the most amount of time with like the best ones that you have available to you and kind of like put the other ones on the back burner. Um, and also another helpful tip that you guys should consider when making like a study schedule is you kind of want to make a schedule for every topic that you want to go through and based like on your problem areas. So for that, like you should be using the results of like your NBMEs and also any like step one practice tests that you guys are doing. You can kind of like figure out your problem areas, like which topics you kind of struggle with and like which topics you're better at, and then you can kind of like allocate more time to the topics that you're kind of struggling with. So like maybe spend like a couple extra days going through one topic versus the other. And you also want to make sure that you are doing some like very good practice tests, like the NBME practice tests that they have online. This is like a great way to kind of like test your knowledge and kind of like see where you're at like the current moment. And like you may find out that it's not going as well as you planned it. So like this can be kind of like a litmus test, like see if like you need to make like any adjustments or if something isn't working. And so yeah, and another thing that like people that's like very helpful for like a step schedule is kind of you want to get like this isn't really like related to like studying or anything like that. It's kind of like get in like a daily routine. So like you want to make sure that like you're waking up at the same time, you're eating meals at the same time, you're kind of going to bed at the same time. This kind of like helps you make a habit and kind of like minimizes the stress on your body, and compared to like maybe like waking up super early one day or maybe going to bed super early or late the next day. It kind of puts like extra stress on your body that you don't really need at the time. So it's good to like kind of like maintain like a regular circadian rhythm and just kind of like and get into a habit of like a daily routine. And especially like leading up to your step exam, you should it's a good idea to like start waking up at the time that you would need to wake up to like take the exam. So like let's say your exam is at 8 o'clock in the morning and you're gonna have to like get up at like 6 o'clock in the morning. Like the week leading up to your exam, you should kind of like get in the habit of like waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning just so it's like easier on your body. And the kind of last thing that I wanted to mention is there's like also like helpful like scheduling apps that like you can get on your phone to like help you with scheduling. I think one of them is called like Cram Fighter or something like that. Hold on, just give me 1 second to look it up. Um, um, yeah, Cram Fighter. That's like one of the apps that you guys can use to help like scheduling things like right now and then like later on you guys will like already have like a schedule made for yourselves. But yeah, that's everything I had.
Okay, thanks, Igor. So Igor gave us a lot of great tips. I think Korean Fighter is a really good resource, actually. It's really helpful in how it helps to not only manage your time, but also help to make sure that you are kind of excluding some of the bad things that kind of get in the way and cause procrastination. So we're going to roll right into our next topic. It's actually pre-dedicated versus dedicated step 1 study plan. And so Yosef Kadar and Jody Chow is going to actually talk about that. Okay.
Hi, y'all. So this is Jody again. So before jumping into that, I actually kind of want to address something that Igor said that may have like conflicting views. So he talked about the importance of like balancing outside resources and weighing resources. So again, like it is a big balance. Like for example, like I wanted just to say like, oh, for example, like the neuro section, I feel like the school definitely went way more in depth than what's required on the actual exam. So a good gauge of like whether the school resources is way in depth versus, you know, what's actually going to be tested is going back to your first aid book. Because the first aid info, all of those, it's basically what's going to be covered. It's like outlines of like what will be tested on the actual test. So that's a good gauge of like whether something is high yield or not. Okay, so the two parts to this section is the pre-dedicated versus the dedicated period. For the pre-dedicated period, definitely focus a lot on working your first pass through UWorld. So you all should already have been doing that with your organ systems. So like by the end of the organ system, you should already have, for example, all of the neuro questions done or all of the cardio questions done. And the way that I would say like doing those questions is to do it tutor mode. And that will really help you learn the material, and you can kind of like really get a gauge of like, oh, what you need to know and not know by reading the question stems. And when you go into UWorld, there's a part where you can select how you review the questions. So I would group them into the incorrects. So you can select that you want to review the incorrect question first, and then do your marked questions, and then do the correct questions if you have time. So yeah, that is how I would suggest reviewing your questions. And let's see, so that's for reviewing your questions. And and a lot of students are going to be like, but Jody, like I didn't have time to finish all of the questions relating to that unit. Well, don't worry. This is when you have time, like right now, you know, on your winter break or whatever break, I would suggest doing a mixed blocks of all of the questions that you have yet to complete from your prior units. So that way, it's actually a very good way of reviewing the prior material throughout the year. And so in addition to doing UWorld, it's a good idea to keep a UWorld study journal, a UWorld journal. So with that, it's writing down the question that you got wrong, and then correlating to that, like, you know, 1 or 2 sentences on, how you would have gotten that question right. And then so on a daily basis, before you go to bed or something, review that journal. So you're constantly reviewing what you got wrong. So that's very important because step 1, it's basically so much knowledge that throughout the year, you really want to be constantly reviewing the material so that when it comes to the month, you can be pretty comfortable and then really work on your test taking strategies. So yeah, that's what I have for the pre-dedicated. And then for the dedicated, I would say that reset your bank at the very start of your dedicated period. And definitely, if you haven't done time mode, you should be switching to your time mode at that time. And if you've been since you should be doing blocks of organ systems prior to dedicated, during a dedicated period, it would be very helpful to switch into mixed blocks. So you're mixing all of the organ systems. and all of the topics together, and you're able to kind of integrate all the knowledge together, because that's how it is on real test day. So for me, a max number of blocks that I was able to do was 2. So one block is 40 questions, as you all already know. And after you do a time block, really take the time to read over the answers and annotate anything. And I would say at the start of your dedicated, start a new journal, because it'll be very important to have a new baseline of like what you need to know. Otherwise, it's very overwhelming. So again, like with that journal, review it every day before you go to bed, so you're constantly reviewing your knowledge, because it's, at the end of the day, it's a marathon. So on test day, you have to sit through a very long exam, and the more things that you have committed to your long-term memory, the faster you'll be able to recall it and apply it on the test day. So yeah, and then there was somebody that asked about scheduling step 1, right? Like that you already got the permit, like when should you schedule for your step day? I would say ASAP. So if you already have in mind like how many weeks you want to take to study for this exam, then pick a date that works for you and schedule it as soon as you can. And again, I think, yeah, and again, like how your schedule is going to work is really dependent on like how much time you want to spend towards dedicated. So, you know, if you only want to spend like 5 weeks, then your schedule will be more intense. You'll be putting in like 10 to 12 hours a day. But if you want to spread it out a little bit more, 7, 8 weeks, then you can really shorten those study hours to like maybe 8 hours a day. And so, yeah, and so it really depends on how much, like what your time frame is. And another thing is that I am one of the health and wellness rep. So definitely try to fit a little bit of health and wellness in. Like for me, if I were doing like a 10 to 12 hour study day, I definitely took a break at like 3 p.m. in the afternoon, because when I hit 3 p.m., I just go into a full coma and I like am not productive anymore. So I make sure I go downstairs and, you know, do some crunches, do some treadmill, and then after you're done, like go back into the zone and just finish out the day. You always want to be making sure that you're actively learning. Like if you're studying and you're just like passively reading, you're not like engaging and learning something new, you should really switch to like a new study plan. And once you find that study plan that really works for you, really stick to it. Don't question it, because you don't have a lot of time to be like switching back and forth between your study style. So yeah, I will let Yusuf tack on anything that I missed, or his words of wisdom.
All right, hey guys. So I'm just going to briefly touch upon some of the things that Jody and Igor talked about. So just really quickly, you know, in the pre-dedicated and answering that first question about what resources to use, honestly, at the end of the day, you guys know who you are as an individual and as a learner. So the biggest advice that I have is that whatever you've been doing, you know if it's been working for you right now, and you also know that if you need to adapt or change, you got to figure that out. I think that the most important thing for you guys as you're beginning your step 1 prep is that you understand that it's good to have a general foundation of knowledge, and you need to get that foundation of knowledge whatever way it comes to you. So for me, I used a lot of the course pack. And even though it may have gone a little bit extra, I personally like that because I like stories. So I like that extra context. And then as I got into, starting to get into step 1 gear, and I was doing UWorld questions or I was doing practice NBMEs, I could understand, okay, this is what they're kind of focusing on towards the NBME. So like Jody mentioned, that our neuroscience curriculum was a little bit more intense than like what was being tested on step 1. So then I knew, okay, I don't have to spend so much time in neuro because, Wayne did a great job of doing neuro. So that's like pre-dedicated how I would focus it up. You just focus in on like understanding who you are as a learner, trying to get that foundation of knowledge, right now. And also more is better at this point before dedicated, because it's always better to have, you guys are lifelong learners. You guys have to make sure that you truly enjoy the learning aspect of it. So that's the most important part in pre-dedicated. Post-dedicated, I think you need, or excuse me, dedicated. Post-dedicated, you guys aren't going to be worrying about this stuff, but dedicated, you want to be very disciplined and you want to be very efficient. So like Jody and Igor were saying, that you want to be able to structure your days, incorporate health and wellness, whatever you're doing, just make sure you're being efficient at it. So for example, my days just consisted of me doing UWorld in the morning, going over my incorrects, going over my, even the answers I got correct, I understood like, okay, why were the incorrect answers incorrect? So making sure you guys are disciplined, organized, and understanding that once you get to dedicated, it's kind of more so you're just fine tuning things in terms of like what resources to use and anything like that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jody and Yusuf, for the information about pre-dedicated versus dedicated study. Excuse me, I want to pause for a minute and answer a few questions that you guys had posed in the live stream. So one of the questions that was asked earlier was, what are the January required activities? And so I was contacted, and I do have an email that I'm reading off of. That's why I'm looking down. So in January, the first really important thing that you have to do is January 6th, there's a CBSE. All students must take that test. The CBSE is the Comprehensive Basic Science Exam. So all M2 students will take that test on January 6th. January 9th, 10th, 16th, 17th, and 24th, there are clinical skills finals. Understand that you will not take a clinical skills final on all of those days. Every student will have one commitment. So every student will have one of those days, right? So each student will have a day. In addition to that, you'll have, there'll be opportunities for re-exams. And those dates are January 20th and 21st. In addition to that, there's a clinical skills written exam that's going to be on January 29th. And lastly, January 27th and 30th is the clinical skills snow day backups. So if you listen to all of that, I think that there's two options for retakes and snow days. Mostly there's three pieces of that. There's a CBSE on January 6th. There's a clinical skills final happening on multiple dates, but one per student. And then there's a clinical skills written exam on January 29th. Okay, so I just want to address that. There was also a question about when a student said that they had received their permit and they were wondering when they should schedule their test. And so I'd like to talk about that as it relates to the dedicated course, the Step 1 prep course. From our standpoint, we ask the students schedule their test date within the 6 to 7 week window of the dedicated period. We want you to work in those first 6 weeks as if you are going to sit for the test. Everyone should be motivated and trying to take the test as soon as they can based on your readiness, right? And that's going to be different for everyone. As you know, the the 7 to 10 day window that for the CBSSA has been lifted. You still have to take a CBSSA, but you don't have to sit for the exam within 7 to 10 days. So we really do advise the students try to schedule those dates around that 6 to 7 week window. And if you need to move it back, you'll move it back. But we want you to study as if you're going to sit within that time frame. Okay. I'm glad. I think Jody actually talked a little bit about that. And so she said, schedule your test as soon as possible. So yeah, if you have your permit, go ahead and schedule your test. Know that if you do need to move that test date, depending on when you move it, there could be a fee. And I just want to say that and be honest and open about it. So we always try to get students to reschedule their test date as early as 30 days. And then when we get down to the weeks and days before the test, it kind of gets more and more expensive. And so we'll actually post some information on the Canvas page about rescheduling fees. Okay. We also wanted to talk about Tutor Mode. There was a question about should I be using Tutor Mode during the pre-dedicated and dedicated period, or should I change it? What should I be doing? And so I always tell students that they want to make sure that they try to move away from Tutor Mode as they approach dedicated study and kind of be done with it during dedicated. But I do want students to speak on this question. So your peer support is here to speak on this too.
Okay, I can start. I think tutor mode is more focused on learning, emphasis on tutor. So that part is great throughout the year when you're really just trying to get down the material and again, build that foundational knowledge. Time mode is really going to help you practice being in the situation where you're timed. You have to think quickly and get to the point you want to get to and answer the question and move on. And so again, I do think it's very important to shift to time mode during dedicated. And that way you are practicing taking a test or a section of a test every single day, and you're working on those skills so that you've got them as buffed as you can by the time you go into test day. But at the same time, if you're someone who still wants to do a lot of learning with UWorld, and you're maybe not through all of your UWorld questions and you really want to get more content out of it, maybe in those early few days, do one timed and one tutor mode. So it kind of just depends on what your goals are, but you definitely want to be practicing taking a test every day. So, you know, maybe use tutor mode definitely throughout the year, and then maybe a little bit during dedicated, but you really want to shift more to a time mode so you're practicing those test taking skills and being under a time pressure. Any other comments on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Katie said, especially that you can do one timed and one tutor paired together. You don't necessarily need to do like one or the other just for a whole day. But definitely you want to be making sure that you're practicing timed mode, especially closer towards your test day, just so that, the other thing is that you want to, I believe our test was was it 6 blocks or 7 blocks? Sorry.
Yeah, I think it was 7.
7.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that is a very long test day. I think at the next session, at the next workshop, we'll go more in depth about like making the exact schedule. But something to keep in mind is that, maybe the week prior, making sure that you actually sat down and took a 7-hour worth of tests so that you have been in that specific time mode before. And you also want to make sure that you plan out all of your breaks, because on exam day, it's crazy. Like time will fly by and you'll be going out to use a bathroom and then you come back, you're like, oh my gosh, it's already been 5 minutes. So I would say like making sure you're wearing a watch so that you're like really aware of your time. But yeah, that is what I have to say about time mode versus tutor mode.
Okay.
So,
coming back to me, right? Okay, I'm just going to take off. I actually just finished a reusable learning objective about step day itself and planning out those breaks. So thank you, Jody, for throwing it over to that topic. But I'm just going to touch on a few things. One, just going over a few things we already talked about. I want you guys to keep in mind that everyone's different, and we're giving you guys a lot of interesting and good strategies. But you know, again, what Yusuf said, you know you best. Pick and choose what works for you. So one thing I wanted to touch on was annotation. I personally took way too long to annotate. I wrote way too much, and I eventually just abandoned it because I learned pretty well just from reading and interacting and doing practice questions on their own. And I could not get to a point where I was fast enough at annotating that it was beneficial for me. So if you are annotating, I recommend look at someone who was successful at annotating. Look at their first aid copy early on, just to get an idea of like how much you should do and like what things were added, because I was writing way too much and spending way too much time and couldn't get through enough of the material by doing that. And then if you are going to annotate, I recommend if you annotate into first aid and you're annotating UWorld, write down the UWorld question, because you can go back into UWorld and search that question if something you wrote down doesn't make sense as you're going back through it. So those are 2 points about annotation. In general, I think integrating step is very overwhelming. So my advice is the same as like pharmacological dosing in geriatric patients, of start low and go slow, especially because it's so overwhelming. So maybe you haven't started UWorld yet, and that's okay, but we want you to start it as soon as possible. So maybe start with as simple as like 3 questions a day, ideally more, but tell yourself I'm doing 3 questions before bed no matter what, and then work up to 5 next week, and then work up to 10. And that way you're going to be able to get to it where it's a routine thing, but you're not jumping into where you feel so stressed and like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get this all done? Okay, so those are my comments on UWorld. I'm going to talk a little bit about wellness in general. And this is applicable to the pre-step process and during dedicated. to me, second year is just like a very stressful time. And so these are my tips and tidbits that I think are important to keep in mind. I would advise everyone to have a friend you can turn to. This particularly was important for me during dedicated, and keep in mind that some people will not want to be contacted during dedicated. They want to go into their home, they want to study. But ideally you have a friend that you can talk to that's going through the same things. You guys can bond over that and vent to each other, and that will hype you up. I texted my friend and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not getting done as much as I thought I would. I'm not going to do well. And she was great. Like, I'm so grateful for her. She always texts me back, you can only do as much as you can. You're going to be fine. Keep working hard. You got this. And so I think since we all have those stressful points, it's good to have that friend you can turn to that knows what you're going through and that can hype you up a little bit. Keep in mind that some people won't want to be contacted, though. I would have some people not in the med school life or not also in dedicated that you can talk to. Have family you can turn to. Have friends you can turn to. They may not get it exactly, but you still have your people there to fall back on when things get too overwhelming. Kind of in line with that, I think perspective is very important. So we're kind of in this, I felt like I was in this little toxic bubble of like, oh my gosh, step one's coming. This is a make or break it. And in some ways, like, it is a very important test, and, you know, your medical career trajectory should not depend on it, but it is important to where we go in our field, and hopefully that changes, but it is a stressful thing, right? So that being said, there's more to life outside of medical school. There's more to life outside of step one, and that's really important to remember. So if you do find yourself getting too stressed or burnout, go do something that helps you remember that there's life outside of med school. I liked volunteering. I like visiting family. I have some cute little cousins I always like to hang out with, and they always recharge me and show me that, like, children are the most wonderful thing ever. And their perspective on life is that, you know, if you just go out and have a good day and you're kind to people and you're happy, it's a good day. And that kind of helps me reset, get out of my little toxic bubble of like medicine, and kind of realize why I'm in medicine in the first place, to help people, not necessarily to do well on tests. Although doing well on tests is important, but you guys get what I'm saying. So kind of like the bread and butter wellness stuff, make sure you're getting enough sleep, especially during dedicated. I'll admit there are times during the year when I have a test the next day and I need to get through a lot of material, and so maybe I don't get as much sleep as I want to get. But especially in dedicated, make sure you're getting the sleep you need to get. Your brain will work best when you are getting your sleep. And you want to, I think of it as like your training. You want to be at your best performance level. You want to have really quality hours of studying. And so if you need 9 hours of sleep a night to get good quality studying in, schedule in that you're going to get 9 hours. If you only need 6, that is great. I applaud you. I wish I was you, but I'm not. But know who you are and make sure you're getting that in, because again, you want to be at your best. You want to be where your brain is as rested as it needs to be so that you are getting the most out of your study hours. Okay. This is sleep advice specific to dedicated. Igor touched on it. But 2 weeks before you want to be on the same sleep schedule you will be on testway. And then I personally experienced this. I have friends who've experienced this, and it happened to me a little during the year, but more during dedicated. The stress and anxiety of like the incoming, like impending test kind of made it difficult for me to fall asleep. So if that happens to you, there are some sleep hygiene things you can keep in mind, like no technology or blue light a few hours before bed. If you exercise in the early evening, you're usually more tired by the time you go to bed. And then if you go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, that's really good for sleep hygiene. There's probably relaxation techniques you guys can Google or look into. And if none of that helps and you're really still having trouble sleeping, reach out to someone, reach out to a counselor, reach out to your physician. You know, they're very experienced folks. They've dealt with this before. You guys need to get your sleep. So if there's anything getting in the way of that, make sure you reach out to someone who can help you with it. Another one, eat well. It's definitely hard to find time to shop and meal prep and all that jazz, but fueling your body with healthy foods is super important to overall well-being and success. I would advise use grocery shopping as like an excuse to productively procrastinate. That's what I call it. When you're too stressed, you don't want to study anymore, go grocery shopping. Gives you a chance to relax and then come home and meal prep. You're relaxing, but you're also doing something to help you prepare for the rest of your week. So I would recommend organizing your schedule so that you take time 1 day of the week or 2 days of the week to prepare food that will last you the rest of the week. Some simple healthy snacks: bananas, apples, oranges, carrots and hummus, cucumbers, almonds, walnuts, raisins, trail mix. A lot of these have like very little prep and you can take them on the go if you're studying in the library, that kind of stuff. Exercise. Everyone exercises differently. It's a great way to de-stress and give your brain a break from all the studying. I liked going on a run halfway through my study, and I found it was good to wake up break up my workday. But even short walks are a great way to stretch your legs, especially if you're sitting at a desk all day. This kind of goes back into like a hype friend, but just keep things positive. You don't have to be overconfident, but be confident in yourself. If you get a question wrong, brush it off. Tell yourself you'll get it next time. If you don't complete everything you wanted to accomplish that day, remind yourself that you did everything you could and that you're going to get more done tomorrow. It's really easy to start down on yourself and be down on yourself and just not be positive. But, you know, you guys will do much better if you stay calm, if you stay positive, and you just have that confidence in yourself. And, you know, all that self-doubt, that just adds to more stress and ultimately does not contribute to your success. So focus on being positive. Focus on you know, refueling yourself emotionally. All that stuff is very important. Another thing, this kind of goes back to the perspective, I like to remind myself that I'm studying hard, not just to pass a test, but to be a good doctor, because then it puts kind of an outcome that's meaningful to me attached to my hard work. Finally, I believe in all of you. I think you guys got this, and I think we're going to take questions.
Hi, so thank you, Katie, for going over step prep as it relates to wellness. I think you gave some really powerful tips, and I think all of our step prep leaders did a great job at, you know, talking about their experience and how it relates to strategies for this test. So what I want us to do now is to pause a bit and talk a little bit about the importance of setting step 1 prep goals. I really want students to be motivated in the fact that this does not have to be a terrible experience. We want it to be a good experience for you. And so starting out thinking about what are goals that you can set right now for yourself, I think is a really good thing. So based on everything that we talked about today, and we're going to take questions in a minute, but based on everything we talked about, try to consider some things that you can start to incorporate in your day if you haven't done so already in order to prepare for this exam. Start thinking about, you know, some of the strategies you heard, you know, maybe I think Katie just mentioned, you know, adding a few questions and building off of those questions every week if you haven't cracked open your Q bank, or you know, getting with someone who's really good at annotation if you're not, and trying to learn from their skills. Those are all things to kind of think about and start to consider. And what I'd like for you guys to do is share those goals that you set for our next session when we meet again in October, to really talk about, you know, what you've done in the last few weeks to start to prepare for STEP. So with that being said, I want us to now go into questions. And actually, we have a few questions that you've asked while we were presenting. And so I want to go to those questions first, and then we'll go into more questions that you have. Okay. So one of the questions that was asked is, does anyone use osmosis or Zenki? And so I want our prep leaders to kind of speak to these. Osmosis and Zenki. Have you guys used those? What was your experience with those?
Unfortunately, I have not used those.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, okay. I'm unmuted. All right. So Zenki, there's a lot of cards in them. So for me, I actually found like the sketchy farm and sketchy micro section to be the most helpful, because it's basically like hardcore memorization. So it gives you like a brief prompt, and then the answer is very simple on the back, but then you can also click and expand and see the related sketches on the bottom, and also any sort of like first aid information on the bottom as well. So for me personally, I did start off using Zenki, like all of it, but a lot of the prompts for me were just very brief and also repetitive. So I stopped using the whole entire deck, and I just focused on the sketchy farm and micro deck. I know a lot of my friends did that, and it worked for them. And on the contrary, I also knew people that did the whole deck. So I feel like if you already have started using Zenki and it works well for you, then definitely keep using it throughout the year. But if you haven't started using it, don't get overwhelmed, because there's so many cards in that deck, and it's going to be hard to like work through it all. So really just pick and choose what works for you. And for osmosis, it's very similar to Sketchy, but each of the sketches is even shorter. So for me, I tried out the vitamins because, every time I learn about the vitamins, it goes up the other year. So for me, those kind of helped. But I feel like out of like all of the resources, Pathoma, Sketchy, First Aid, those three are definitely still like the most high yield.
Okay. We have another question. How often should I take a day off during dedicated?
Yusuf, do you want to take this one? Oh, just kidding. I could talk until you get unmuted. I think it depends on you. There will be times, I heard this from students when I was prepping to take STEP, that say you might have work scheduled for a weekend, but if you're burnt out and you need to take that weekend off, take the weekend off and reset yourself so that you can go back to work on Monday. Some people schedule it so that they grinded throughout the week, Monday through Friday, and then they took the weekend off to recharge. Some people do it where they took half an afternoon off. I think a good way that I originally planned for it, things don't happen as planned, but I originally planned for was I take a test, NBME, so like a half step on a morning of a weekend day, and then I take the rest of the day off, and I do other things with my day. If you're someone who needs to take 1 day a week off, that's great. If the half day works for you, that's great. If you get burnt out and you need to take a day off, that's okay too. I think just always schedule in that time. Anticipate that you'll need a break, schedule in some time, but also don't, chain yourself to your desk if you are totally burnt out and not getting anything done. What do you guys think? Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with Katie. I think, again, it just boils down to that you know yourself the best. And in terms, I think there's no right number. Like, I can't say you should always take, 1 day off a week or 2 days off a week. It's going to be, there might be you're studying one day and you sit down to study and you realize you're not retaining anything. So then just take the day off if you feel like you need it. Or, if you were going to study the whole day, take like half the day off, 3/4 of the day off, whatever you need to do just to get, fresh in your mind. So just like it's a little bit of trial and error, but you just have to be confident and just know that if you efficiently study, it'll be fine.
Yeah, I agree with that. You will always feel like there's more that you can do in a given day. And even at the end of this dedicated period, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I wish I did this and that and that. But no, like you all have come so far. You've made it into med school. You've done your first and second year. Like, way more than you feel like So at the end of the day, it's really building up that confidence. And whenever, at the end of the day, you're very down about it, think about what you accomplished earlier in that day and really focus on the positive. And that way you'll be able to like be rejuvenated and not be bogged down by all these negativity and just stay positive, because having a good mindset will definitely like boost your confidence, and that will translate into your performance as well.
Okay, thank you guys for addressing that question. We have another question, and I'm going to start out by answering this one actually. I'm not going to read everything. It's pretty lengthy, but basically it talks about OLT making a recommendation to take CBSSAs within 10 to 14 days. And it talks about, why would you do that? And there are other forms that you can use. Maybe I should read it. It says on Canvas, it was mentioned that OLT recommends students use CBSSAs to test progress every 10 to 14 days. While I understand that there are 6 total CBSSAs and BMEs, and 1 is saved to provide results to Wayne, what is the rationale for every 10 to 14 days? Since there are many other tests available, such as UWorld Sem 2 and others, how detrimental might it be to complete practice tests, say every week, assuming, of course, reviewing of the tests will be done? And so I want to start out by talking about this question. It's a good question. So I want to start out by saying that if you got the impression that we were telling you that you should, or that it's important that you take a test every 14 days, that really wasn't the message that I was trying to convey. And so I might need to change some wording in there. But I think more so this, the reason why this was added is that we have some students that say, I have to take a assessment every week. And so I think that can be detrimental to students. So I usually tell students to make sure that they spread it out at least 10 to 14 days. And so that was the purpose of kind of mentioning that. And so I probably need to look at that. But I think it is important that you do self-test yourself before you take your 7 to 10 day CBSSA. I always tell students, why wait until the institution tests you? Test yourself first, see where you are. So I'm kind of rushing in my speech because we have seconds left. So we are out of time, unfortunately, but I do want you to be motivated to attend our next session. I want to thank all of the peer leaders who are here in support of you. Igor, Jody, Katie, Yosef, we thank you so much for attending this session. And we will have another session on October 3rd. Please be there to join us. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.